My name is Officer Jessica Morris, a 29-year-old police officer stationed in the quiet town of Pinewood. It's a small, peaceful community, nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forests. My usual patrol area includes the outskirts of town, where the houses are sparse and the roads are dark and winding. One night, during a routine patrol, I received a call about a suspicious person lurking around the homes in a remote neighborhood. It was an area known for its large, isolated properties, and the thought of someone prowling around in the dark was unsettling. I headed over, prepared for what I thought would be a simple trespassing case. When I arrived, I met the caller, Mrs. Henderson, a middle-aged woman who lived alone. She was visibly shaken and said she had seen a man standing outside her house, watching her through the windows. She described him as tall, wearing dark clothes, and said he seemed to vanish when she looked directly at him. I assured her I would check the area and keep an eye on things. I walked around the property, shining my flashlight into the woods and around the house. The area was thick with tall trees and underbrush, making it easy for anyone to hide. I saw nothing unusual and chalked it up to nerves. After all, it was a dark, quiet night, and Mrs. Henderson had been alone. As I was about to leave, I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure darted behind a tree at the edge of the yard. My heart skipped a beat. I drew my flashlight and shone it towards the tree, but there was no one there. I called out, identifying myself as a police officer, but there was no response. I approached the tree cautiously, hand on my holster. The area was eerily silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. When I reached the tree, I found nothing but darkness beyond. I walked around the perimeter of the property again, but the figure was gone. I returned to Mrs. Henderson's house and told her I couldn't find anyone, but I would continue to patrol the area. She seemed reassured, but still nervous. I drove down the street, checking the other houses and looking for any sign of the mysterious figure. Pinewood at night can feel almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every small noise and makes you aware of how alone you are. As the night wore on, I saw no further signs of anyone suspicious. I returned to my usual patrol routes, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that someone was watching me. The woods around Pinewood can be unsettling at night, with the shadows and the sounds of wildlife. But this felt different, like a presence lurking just out of sight. A few nights later, I was patrolling the same area when I received another call from Mrs. Henderson. She was frantic, saying the man was back, standing in her yard. This time, she sounded genuinely terrified, and I sped over, lights flashing, hoping to catch the intruder in the act. When I arrived, I saw him, a tall, shadowy figure standing near the edge of the woods. The figure was barely discernible in the dim light, but he was there, unmoving. I jumped out of the car, flashlight in hand, and shouted for him to stop. He turned and ran into the forest. I pursued him, my heart racing. The forest was dense, and it was hard to navigate in the dark, but I was determined to catch him. I lost sight of him, but continued deeper into the woods, listening for any sound. The crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig were the only noises breaking the silence. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to move. I was starting to think I was chasing a ghost, or maybe just a figment of my imagination. After several minutes, I decided to head back to Mrs. Henderson's house. I was frustrated and a little spooked. As I walked back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the ground, was a piece of paper. I picked it up and shone my flashlight on it. It was a photograph of Mrs. Henderson's house, taken from the woods. The angle suggested it had been taken from a hidden vantage point, likely with a telephoto lens. My mind raced with questions and fears for Mrs. Henderson's safety. I hurried back to her house and showed her the photograph. She was terrified and said she had never seen it before. We realized this wasn't just a case of trespassing. Someone had been stalking her, watching her every move. The thought that someone had been so close, watching, documenting, made my skin crawl. It was a level of obsession that could easily escalate. Over the next few days, we increased patrols in the area, and advised Mrs. Henderson to stay with a friend until we could catch the stalker. We also set up surveillance cameras around her property. The town was abuzz with rumors, and the usually tranquil community felt a little less safe. The locals were on edge, locking their doors and peering out their windows, afraid of who might be watching them. A week later, we caught a break. One of the cameras captured footage of a man approaching the house. He moved stealthily, staying in the shadows, but the camera caught his face clearly enough for identification. We were able to identify him as Michael Reed, a local who had a history of mental illness and had been in and out of trouble with the law. We arrested Reed without incident. During questioning, he confessed to watching Mrs. Henderson and taking the photograph. He said he had been fascinated by her and enjoyed watching her from the shadows. Reed spoke with a disturbing calmness, as if his actions were perfectly normal. It was a chilling confession, and I felt a deep sense of relief that we had caught him before he could do any harm. The most disturbing part was his reasoning. Reed claimed he was protecting Mrs. Henderson, watching over her to ensure she was safe. It was clear he had developed an unhealthy obsession with her, seeing himself as her silent guardian. The authorities quickly moved to have him evaluated, and he was placed under psychiatric care. Mrs. Henderson returned to her home, and we assured her that Reed was in custody and wouldn't be bothering her again. The town of Pinewood returned to its quiet, peaceful state, but the incident left a lasting impression on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something far worse. It was a stark reminder that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. And as a police officer, it's my duty to protect my community from that darkness, no matter how unsettling it might be. The experience made me more vigilant, always aware of the potential for danger, even in a town as small and seemingly safe as Pinewood. Sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't the ones we can see, but the ones that hide in plain sight, just out of view. This incident reinforced my belief in the importance of community vigilance and the role of law enforcement in keeping those shadows at bay. In the end, we caught the man, and justice was served. But the memory of that shadowy figure standing at the edge of the woods will always stay with me, a reminder of the unknown threats that can lurk in the quietest of places. It was a chilly autumn night, and I was working the graveyard shift at the precinct. My partner, Officer Kelly, and I had been cruising through the quiet streets of our small town, chatting about mundane things to pass the time. We were about to head back to the station for a coffee break when the call came through. Dispatched to Unit 12, we received a report of suspicious activity near the old Thompson warehouse. Can you respond? The Thompson warehouse had been abandoned for years. It used to be a hub of activity, but had fallen into disrepair after the owner went bankrupt. Now it was just a crumbling relic on the outskirts of town, a place where kids dared each other to go on a dare. Copy that, dispatch? We're on our way, Kelly replied, his voice steady, but I could sense the unease between us. There were rumors about that place, strange lights, weird noises, people disappearing. It was the kind of stuff that made for good campfire stories. As we pulled up to the warehouse, the headlights illuminated the building's decaying facade. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rotting wood. We stepped out of the cruiser, and Kelly shone his flashlight on the entrance, where the door hung loosely on its hinges. Looks like it's been forced open, Kelly muttered. We made our way inside, the floor creaking under our boots. The warehouse was a maze of old crates and machinery, everything covered in a thick layer of dust. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe. We split up to cover more ground, keeping our radios on. I moved through the main storage area while Kelly checked the offices upstairs. As I rounded a corner, I heard a faint rustling noise. I paused, listening. It sounded like footsteps, but they were too soft, almost like shuffling. Kelly, you hear that? I whispered into my radio. Yeah, I hear it. Sounds like it's coming from your side, he responded, his voice crackling with static. I followed the noise deeper into the warehouse. The temperature seemed to drop the further I went, and the air grew stale. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The sound of shuffling grew louder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned a corner and froze. There, in the dim beam of my flashlight, stood a figure. It was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothing. Its back was to me, but I could see its head cocked at an unnatural angle. The figure moved slowly, its movements jerky and unsettling. "Police! Turn around and show me your hands!" I shouted, my voice betraying a hint of fear. The figure stopped, but didn't turn around. Instead, it started whispering, a low, guttural sound that sent a wave of unease through me. The words were unintelligible, but they were filled with a strange, unsettling cadence. I gripped my flashlight tighter and took a step forward. I said, "Turn around!" Suddenly, the figure whipped around and I gasped. The face was pale and featureless, like a blank mask. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth white skin. The whispering stopped, and the figure stood motionless, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. Fear clawed at my chest, but I kept my composure. I reached for my radio, but before I could speak, the figure lunged at me with an unnatural speed. I stumbled back, raising my flashlight to defend myself, but the figure vanished into thin air. Gone. Panting, I scanned the area, my heart pounding in my ears. There was no sign of the figure, but the air was still thick with that unnatural chill. I quickly radioed Kelly. "Kelly, we've got something weird going on down here. I need backup." There was no response. Just static. Panic set in as I tried to raise him again. "Kelly, do you copy? Where are you?" I heard a faint, distant noise like static mixed with a faint hum. I followed the sound, my pulse racing. It led me to a small room at the back of the warehouse, one I hadn't noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, and the sound grew louder as I approached. I pushed the door open and froze. Inside was a small, dusty office with an old desk and a single chair. But it wasn't the room that caught my attention. It was the old radio sitting on the desk, playing that eerie, distorted hum. And on the floor, sprawled out as if unconscious, was Kelly. I rushed to his side, shaking him. "Kelly, wake up!" He stirred, groaning softly, and opened his eyes. They were unfocused, like he was in a trance. I helped him to his feet, and he blinked, looking around in confusion. What happened?" he mumbled. "You tell me," I said, glancing at the radio. The hum had stopped, replaced by a faint static. "Did you see anything? Hear anything?" Kelly shook his head, still dazed. "I was upstairs checking the offices. Then nothing. It's all blank." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was very wrong with this place. We needed to leave and fast. I helped Kelly back to the cruiser, constantly looking over my shoulder. The warehouse loomed behind us, silent and foreboding. We got in the car and drove back to the station, neither of us speaking. The whole way, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back at the precinct, we filed our report, but it was full of holes. We couldn't explain what happened, and we didn't have any evidence. The higher-ups dismissed it as a prank or a misunderstanding, but Kelly and I knew better. A few days later, we heard that the old Thompson warehouse had been demolished. No one wanted to keep it standing after the strange incident. But even after it was gone, Kelly and I couldn't forget what we saw or didn't see. To this day, I still wonder about that faceless figure and the strange hum from the radio. What was it? A ghost? A trick of the mind? Whatever it was, it left a mark on us, a lingering unease that never quite went away. And sometimes, late at night, I think I hear that faint, distorted hum in the distance, like a reminder that some things are better left forgotten.